Welcome, everybody. I'm Simon Buckingham Shum at the University of Technology, Sydney, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you to the first international symposium on educating for collective intelligence. And we're really here to try and figure out what on earth that might mean. I'm welcoming you, of course, not just myself, but on behalf of the co-chairs for this event, Margaret Bierman, Mike Hogan, Anna Dolido, and Rupert Wegereff, and Baki Kokabali, sorry, who cannot be here today, but is also with us in spirit. Before we go any further, as is our tradition here in Australia, I want to acknowledge that the UTS City campus is on the grounds of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We are on their ancestral lands, and I want to pay respect to elders, both past and present, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for this land. And as we think about collective intelligence and what we might mean by that and how that works, let's remember that for over 50,000 years, the oldest people on the planet have been here in Australia. And there are many other First Nations peoples around the world who have figured out how to live and share collective intelligence in very rich and diverse ways, some of which we've lost. And it may well be that some of those ideas come up in the discussion today. I am, though, acutely aware that amongst our speakers today, we do not have, to my knowledge, Indigenous speakers, people sharing knowledge and wisdom from Indigenous knowledge systems and ways of knowing. And that is something that I hope we may correct in future meetings. Why are we here? We're here because of the polycrisis, to start with. Present and future risks interacting with each other to form a polycrisis, a cluster of related global risks with compounding effects such that the overall impact exceeds the sum of each part. And if you look in this year's Global Risks Report from the World Economic Forum, you'll see diagrams of this sort showing how enmeshed and entangled different systems are in our planet now. But we also have a meta-crisis. Some of you may be familiar with this term, and I encourage you to explore that further if you're interested. The polycrisis says we've got a big mess of problems out there, but if we're smart enough, we can solve them with new ways of teaching, new technology, etc. The meta-crisis, here we have Jonathan Rowson, draws attention to interiority, the meaning of meta as within ourselves. Relationality, meta as between. His diagnosis, and that of many others, is that we almost have a spiritual crisis of some sort, rather than simply a political challenge of will and science and technology. And he also talks about meta as beyond. And there are brilliant thinkers out there now thinking about the meta crisis. Daniel Schmachtenberger at the Consilience Project. We've got Zach Stein with us today, who's part of that. Ian McGilchrist. So many bright people thinking about the meta crisis. Vanessa Andriotti talking about hospicing modernity, the diagnosis of our problems, the underlying drivers of the polycrisis is that we have a crisis of how we have become disconnected from ourselves, each other, nature, and the cosmos, and maybe even the divine, depending on whether you're comfortable with that kind of language. But we have become so disconnected that these are the underlying challenges we must now try and resolve. So whether you're on the spectrum of we can do this to I'm feeling quite down at the doomer end of things, we're going to have an interesting conversation today, because surely learning at scale, and education are going to be part of the solution here. But what we mean by education may be rather different from just what we have at the moment, of course. So we're here to think about CI. And I think we're going to be spending some time understanding that it might mean quite different things. We're certainly thinking about education, broadly construed. And of course, the dot is, well, exactly what do we think this relationship is? How does CI shape how we are doing teaching and learning in the future? Not only how we teach CI, but actually experience it and cultivate people who are capable of creating collective intelligence of the right sorts. We'll hear some criticism of the even of the term collective intelligence. We have multiple CIs in the room, in fact. We don't just have collective intelligence, we've got an argument for civic intelligence from Doug Schuler. We have people like Doug and Aldo de Moor coming from the community informatics world, another CI. So we have a swirl of CIs mixing, of course, with AI. Some people believe that large language models are a form of collective intelligence. For others, that would be the last way we want to think about CI. And we have IA, intelligence augmentation, an orientation that wants to step away from trying to automate people, but rather augment their individual and, of course, collective intelligence. And that goes way back to my roots, working since my PhD in the late 90s and being inspired by Doug Engelbart, who, of course, gave us a vision of collective intelligence long before most people even knew what a personal computer looked like. So we have a sparkling group of people in the room. I am so excited to bring together people I know as well as people I don't yet know so well to talk about this. It's going to be like a buffet of hors d'oeuvres and tasters today. Everyone in this room could speak for a day on what they have been doing, in some cases for decades. You're going to get 10 minutes, which is why we encouraged you to read their papers beforehand. And then there'll be about 10 minutes for Q&A. But this is just the starter, and we'll see where we go from today's symposium. We encourage you to share your thoughts using the Q&A button, which you should see at the bottom. That's the chance to post a question, and you can vote them up as well for questions you like. We have got the chat running. Hopefully you can all chat, and that may get a bit crazy depending on how many people join, but that transcript will be shared afterwards anyway. It can be a nice place just to sort of sense the vibe in the room and so forth. But we also have the Google Doc. You all have links to that Google Doc, and that's perhaps a more organizing place, a longer term memory place to put thoughts and ideas. So that's all I want to do, other than remind you that we are recording now. So if you're tempted to freak out, then know that will be captured for posterity. Okay, I'm going to hand right over now to our keynote speakers, who are Mike Hogan, Rupert Wegerif, and Imogen Caseborn. And it was their paper, Educating for Collective Intelligence, that excited me so much that the two worlds I had been inhabiting were joining finally. So I'm going to hand over to them. Mike, over to you to share the slides that you're going to jointly present with Rupert and Imogen.